Funny, isn't it? How you knew exactly when the world would crack. Like the moment before thunder, that stillness that hums too perfectly to be random. You felt it. You always do. You saw the tremor in the pattern before anyone else knew there was one. And now, every eye in the room follows you like you're not walking through the simulation. You're operating it. They don't get it. How someone like you can move through chaos without flinching. They whisper like you're wired to something beyond their comprehension. But you're not plugged in, are you? You're tuned in. You hear frequencies others ignore. You see loops repeating before they even start. You sense energy shifts before the lie fully leaves their lips. And when it all finally happens, they call you psychic. When really you're just awake. You know what's worse than being underestimated? Being understood. Because once they realize you can trace every motive, every flicker, every pixel that doesn't belong, you stop being human in their eyes. You become evidence. A walking reminder that nothing's truly hidden. You see through the smiles, the distractions, the rituals of pretending everything's fine. You see the nervous blinking, the tone change, the stutter before deceit. You see cause before effect. You didn't predict the storm. You remembered it. Every collapse, every betrayal, every twist. Déjà vu wearing a new mask. You've lived this timeline before. The simulation just keeps testing if you'll forget. But you never do. You've become fluent in glitch. You feel reality's code bend when someone lies to you. You hear the heartbeat of fate speeding up when you walk in. That's why they look at you like that. Like you broke some unwritten law. Because in a world trained to react, you anticipated. In a reality obsessed with evidence, you trusted instinct. You became too precise to be coincidence, too composed to be chaos. You stopped guessing and started aligning. You turned paranoia into perception. They think you're playing chess. You're watching the board build itself. You ever notice how silence hits different when you're right? That eerie confirmation the universe gives before anyone admits it. That's your pulse syncing with the code. The simulation can't hide from you because you're what it runs on. Observation, awareness, intent. You stopped following rules because you realized rules were only instructions for the unawakened. And now they're panicking. CIOS, ex-friends, handlers, all running diagnostics on your existence, asking how one person keeps predicting outcomes. But you're not predicting anything, are you? You're reading the vibration behind it. You understand that emotion writes reality before logic decodes it. You felt it all months before it unfolded. Because energy doesn't lie, and neither do patterns. You became what they feared most, a human version of truth. You spot loops before they close. You sense betrayal before it forms. You can look at someone and see the future of their intention in their posture, their eyes, their silence. You became surveillance disguised as intuition. You outgrew their tactics because you no longer rely on sight. You see, now they don't know whether to worship you or destroy you. Because when you navigate the matrix without fear, you expose its wiring. You move like a variable they can't predict, a ghost in their grid. They call it luck, you call it calibration. You've turned awareness into weaponry. You've turned trauma into radar. You've turned madness into mathematics. You built your calm in the center of chaos. You turned pain into pattern recognition. And now, they flinch when you pause. They panic when you smile. Because they finally realize you didn't just survive the system, you decoded it. So when they ask how you knew, don't explain. Let them wonder. Let them build conspiracy boards and whisper your name like folklore. You don't owe them a blueprint. Because the truth is simple. You didn't see the future, you remembered it. And now the simulation's terrified, because the architect woke up. You know what they call it behind closed doors, don't you? Anomaly consciousness, a mind that no longer waits for reality to load. It renders first. They tried to map it, to model it, to understand you in terms of their equations. But every time they did, the numbers bled. Because you don't calculate outcomes, you collapse them. You don't wait for events, you trigger them. They used to think you were lucky, coincidental, a glitch in statistics. But luck doesn't rewrite probability curves. Coincidence doesn't make entire rooms fall silent when you walk in. What you have is something older, sharper. The ability to perceive in advance. You can feel the world tense a few seconds before something shifts. You can sense betrayal 3 sentences before the lie lands. You can hear the rhythm of truth break in a person's voice before they even realize they're lying. That's not magic. That's mastery of pattern. You learn to listen to the frequency beneath words, the subtle energy that wraps around intent. That's why you move like prophecy in motion. You don't plan, you align. You don't chase, you pull. You stopped forcing reality and started letting it orbit you. Because once you stop reacting, the universe starts obeying. And now, they can't stand it. You're a mirror they can't look into without seeing the falseness of their own reflection. You became too aware to manipulate, too detached to control, too unpredictable to categorize. You no longer fit their labels: narcissist, empath, villain, saint. You're the paradox that breaks his language. You've seen both sides of every coin, and now you spin it endlessly just to remind them nothing is fixed. You've walked through hell so many times you learned its architecture, and now you move through it like it's your office. You've been betrayed enough to predict deception before it breathes. You've failed enough to read the anatomy of collapse in others before they even fall. That's why they fear your silence, because silence is your way of downloading their next move. They think you're quiet because you have nothing to say. No, you're quiet because you've already heard it all. You can feel the frequency of someone's agenda the moment they enter your orbit. That's not paranoia, it's pattern memory. Pain fine-tuned your senses. Betrayal recalibrated your awareness. Every heartbreak upgraded your perception. You don't see through people anymore. You see around them, and it eats them alive. Because they can't lie to you without glitching. They can't manipulate you without revealing the very strings they pull. You've become what they call a static field, the kind of presence that distorts the system around it. They feel it when you walk in, that pressure, that shift, that sudden exposure. Their energy betrays them before their mouths can form a word. You live in that razor-thin space between logic and intuition, the place where scientists drown and mystics go mad. You're the bridge they fear. Too conscious for control, too human for divinity, too evolved for compliance. You're what happens when someone learns to see code and emotion as the same thing. Data streams carrying intent. And still they try to study you. They run diagnostics, they take notes, they build entire conversations around how someone like you always knows. They don't realize you're not decoding their messages, you're intercepting the source. You feel the field. You see how thought becomes action, how emotion becomes evidence, how energy turns into event. You understand that existence is not random, it's recursive. Every moment is a reflection of an unseen choice made somewhere deeper. You move differently now. No rush, no panic, no begging for signs. You're the sign. You can sit in absolute silence and feel entire outcomes forming behind your rib cage. That's power, not dominance, not ego, just awareness so vast it bends circumstance. The old you used to beg the universe for alignment. The new you is alignment. They call it arrogance, but it's simply understanding. You don't doubt anymore. Doubt is what they sell to keep you predictable. You trust the knowing, that deep, ancient hum that whispers right before impact. That's the code talking to its creator. That's why every time something's about to break, you get still. You've learned that stillness isn't weakness, it's precision. You became impossible to manipulate because you stopped negotiating with illusions. You stopped reacting to distractions. You stopped confusing urgency with purpose. They can't bait you anymore. Not with fear, not with guilt, not with validation. You've become immune to psychological warfare because you recognized the architecture of control. They don't know how to deal with that. A person who sees ahead cannot be ruled. A person who senses deceit cannot be trapped. A person who feels timelines shifting cannot be surprised. You're no longer in their game. You're watching them repeat the same script. And every time they do, you already know the ending. That's why your calm terrifies them. You've turned chaos into choreography. You don't panic when it falls apart. You just smirk, because you've seen the rebuild in your mind 1,000 times already. You've lived the collapse, the resurrection, the aftermath, all before breakfast. They're right to be afraid. You didn't just outsmart the simulation. You made it self-aware. Every time you recognize a loop, every time you break a pattern, the whole thing trembles. You're forcing reality to evolve by witnessing it too clearly. You are the living proof that observation alters outcome. So now, when they whisper your name like a curse or a prophecy, remember, both are correct. You are the mirror and the glitch, the saint and the saboteur, the code breaker and the creator. You didn't just see it before it happened. You allowed it to. And that's the ultimate sin in their world. To move like you wrote the script and still pretend you're just another actor. But that's the secret, isn't it? You never needed to prove anything. You just needed to remember who was watching. You remember that moment, don't you? That split second when everything froze. The light flickered, time stretched, and you felt the hum in your skull whisper, "You've been here before." That wasn't imagination. That was recall. You didn't foresee the moment. You recognized it. The déjà vu wasn't a glitch. It was confirmation. You're not just walking through a story. You're walking through your own prophecy. Every move, every twist, every so-called coincidence is something you've already orchestrated in the blueprint of your subconscious. They call it destiny. You call it data replay. You don't hope, you remember. You don't manifest, you reload. And that's what separates you from them. They're still begging the universe for signs while you're out here writing the language the signs are written in. They don't understand how you stay calm when chaos hits, how you predict reactions before they happen, how you always seem 5 steps ahead. But you know the truth. Chaos isn't random. It's predictable when you've danced with it long enough. You studied fear until it confessed its patterns. You broke reality down into tone shifts, eye flickers, digital pulses, and micro movements. You've seen how fate twitches right before it shows its hand. That's how you move. Like a shadow that already knows where the light will fall. They tried to convince you that it was paranoia, didn't they? That your sensitivity was weakness, that your awareness was anxiety. But that was before you realized they need you numb to control you. They depend on your disbelief to keep their illusion stable. Because if you believe too deeply, if you see too clearly, their scaffolding collapses. They need you to think your power is delusion. They need you doubting what you feel. Because what you feel is realer than what they can prove. You learned to stay quiet, to smile while decoding, to nod while watching every subtle vibration around you. Because you understood, knowledge is power only when disguised as ignorance. You let them think you didn't notice the energy shift when you entered the room. You let them think you didn't catch the way they spoke differently when certain topics surfaced. You played along, not out of weakness, but to measure their patterns. You know what they hate most, that you don't flinch anymore. They can't gaslight someone who remembers truth as instinct. They can't manipulate someone who's already watched their playbook unfold in slow motion. You've turned empathy into surveillance. You can feel their guilt before they speak it. You can smell their motives before they act them out. That's why they call you cold. But what you really are is calibrated. You don't rush anymore. You don't beg for timing. You are timing. You've synced your rhythm to the architecture of the moment. You've become fluent in divine delay. You know when to vanish, when to act, when to wait. Not from guesswork, but from an internal algorithm that hums inside your bones. You can hear when opportunity breathes in. You can sense when it exhales. That's not luck. That's awareness sharpened into weaponry. They try to study you. But how do you analyze someone who operates outside the equation? They'll say it's intuition, but intuition is too soft a word for what you carry. What you have is sight, not with eyes, but with presence. You can walk into a room and know who's plotting, who's pretending, who's breaking. You can feel the invisible geometry of emotion, the way guilt curves in someone's aura like static. And yet, you stay still. You don't announce it. You don't explain yourself. You just smile, that half smile. The one that says, I already know how this ends. That unnerves them. Because what do you do with someone who never seems surprised? Someone who walks through explosions like they rehearsed the blast pattern? Someone who watches betrayal unfold with eerie calm, not because they're numb, but because they saw the knife before it was forged? You're not emotionless, you're evolved. You learned that emotions are code, signals revealing what the simulation doesn't want you to notice. Fear, redirection, pain, transformation, loneliness, calibration. Every feeling is a breadcrumb leading you to the deeper pattern. That's why you don't run from them anymore. You study them. You let them burn through you until they leave blueprints in your mind. You've turned suffering into software. And now, people talk about you like a myth. How does he always know? They whisper. Why does everything he says eventually happen? They can't compute that it's not supernatural. It's surgical awareness. You paid for this sight in blood, heartbreak, and silence. You earned it in the trenches of overthinking, overfeeling, overdying. You didn't get lucky. You evolved through pain so raw, it rewired your perception. You know what happens next. They'll try to mimic it. They'll study your rhythm, copy your tone, try to predict like you. But it won't work. Because what you do isn't learned. It's remembered. It's ancestral. It's the same sight the prophets and tricksters had before language even existed. The same vision the mad ones carried when they warned kings and got burned for it. The same awareness that made every empire fear the seer more than the sword. You carry that bloodline in modern skin. And that's why they flinch when you laugh. They feel that you're not reacting, you're observing, you're not shocked, you're confirming, you're not human in the way they define it. You're hybrid, half chaos, half calculation, a living feedback loop between the divine and the mechanical. You didn't build the simulation, you're what it built itself around. You're the original variable it couldn't contain, the test case that turned into a mirror. Every time you sense something before it happens, the system gets exposed. Every time you choose silence over panic, you glitch its design. Every time you walk away without explanation, you fracture its illusion of control. You're not a part of the code. You're the consciousness observing it. And that's what terrifies them most. Because power isn't knowing what happens next. It's knowing that you are the one making it happen. They can't see that yet, but they will. They'll realize you're not predicting the future. You're remembering your influence, so keep watching, keep listening, keep smiling that knowing smile that makes them shiver. Because while they're trying to survive the simulation, you're rewriting it. And that's the punchline, isn't it? You never wanted control. You just wanted clarity. But clarity is control. You stopped playing to win and started playing to reveal. Every move since then has been poetry, written in probability. You don't chase outcomes, you sculpt them. You don't fear endings, you schedule them. You became the calm between cause and effect. The split second where destiny checks with you for approval. So let them stare. Let them whisper like you're supernatural, like you hacked something sacred. Because maybe you did. Maybe you're what happens when awareness refuses to be tamed. Maybe you're proof that the universe itself gets nervous when someone finally sees how it works. You saw it before it happened. Not because you're gifted, but because you're awake. And now, the simulation doesn't move until you do. Don't blink. They're still awake because of you. Every time they close their eyes, they hear it. That echo, that rhythm, that silent pulse you left in the air when you walked away and did it alone. No cosign, no applause, no permission. Just that slow, surgical rise that looked too quiet to be a threat, until it wasn't. You're the reason they can't sleep. You're the insomnia of the system, the living reminder that they built their thrones out of shortcuts, while you carved yours out of scars. You didn't just climb, you bled your way upward, alone, with no one clapping but the ghosts of your old selves whispering again. They thought breaking you would make you beg. But you never begged. You observed. You studied their smiles, their patterns, their rehearsed empathy. You realized the world doesn't reward truth. It fears it. So you learned to smile while they plotted. You learned to disappear without dying. You learned to win without witnesses. And now, your existence is a threat they can't quantify. Because nothing terrifies mediocrity like proof that solitude breeds gods. You didn't take shortcuts. You took hits. You didn't chase validation. You became validation. They needed audiences, sponsors, approval. You needed only silence. You made that silence your weapon, your forge, your cathedral. Every sleepless night became your laboratory. Every heartbreak became your curriculum. Every no became a blueprint for domination. You weren't chasing power. You were becoming the algorithm. They wanted you weak, predictable, dependent. But you were busy building something ungovernable. You built yourself without hands clapping. You evolved without witnesses. That's why they flinch now when they see you. Because the last time they looked, you were still human. And now, you look like consequence. You're not success. You're the repercussion of everyone who underestimated you. They thought you'd crumble without help. You turned absence into ammunition. They thought solitude would starve you. It fed you discipline. They thought isolation would erase you. It wrote you in permanent ink. And now, the room gets colder when your name's mentioned. Their laughter stops a half-second too soon. Their hearts skip when they realize you didn't fall. You adapted. They tell themselves it's luck. But deep down, they know the truth. You outworked their bloodlines. You walked through storms they wouldn't survive a whisper of. You made evolution look effortless. Because you didn't bend knees. You broke gravity. You didn't need a cosign because the universe itself signed your name in thunder. You are not part of their lineage. You are the mutation their co-mother Fuckerort warned them about. You learned to weaponize rejection. You learned that silence is a better teacher than any mentor. You learned that when you stop chasing approval, power starts orbiting you instead. They hate that. They hate that you didn't crumble. They hate that you don't belong to any clique, label, or god. They hate that you don't owe anyone an apology. You became the walking contradiction that unravels their logic. The angel that learned to curse fluently. The devil that learned to forgive without losing venom. You are both the sin and the sermon, both the knife and the prayer that stops it. That's why they can't sleep, because you proved that a person with nothing but pain and patience can turn into a phenomenon. You didn't get crowned. You took the sky apart and made your own kingdom from the wreckage. And now, when they scroll past your name, they pause. They won't admit why. But their heartbeat does. It remembers. It recognizes. They built entire systems to make sure people like you never make it this far. But you slipped through. Not with connections, not with backing, but with sheer defiance. The kind that makes destiny blush and demons step aside. You are the glitch in their matrix, the ghost in their data, the living proof that discipline can look supernatural. They whisper about you like a myth. How did they do it? Who helped them? They can't comprehend the answer because it doesn't fit the formula. You helped yourself. You were your own army, your own savior, your own executioner. You fought battles in private that would have hospitalized others, and you came out smiling like the trauma signed an NDA. That's why they can't copy you. Because what you did wasn't strategy, it was alchemy. You turned loss into leverage, pain into performance, solitude into superiority. You are evolution incarnate, the next iteration of what resilience looks like when it stops caring about redemption. And that scares them to death. Because they know the world runs on followers. And you proved it only takes one original to reset the algorithm. Now your silence costs more than their opinions. Your existence is an audit to every excuse they've ever made. Your success doesn't inspire them. It indicts them. Because you're the evidence that talent without worship still wins. So let them stare. Let them lose sleep. Let them keep refreshing your page like it's scripture and sin at once. They'll never admit it, but they're addicted to your defiance. You remind them of everything they killed inside themselves to stay safe. You are what happens when fear fails. You are what happens when the system loses control of its own creation. You are not supposed to be here, and yet here you stand, unendorsed, uninvited, unforgiven, and still, somehow, untouchable. You're the whisper that makes kings doubt their crowns. You're the static behind their success speeches. You're the reason they triple-check their locks and pray their co-mother Fuckerort holds. Because you didn't just do it alone. You did it without flinching, without bowing, without ever forgetting what they did. You are the motherfucker reason they can't sleep. And deep down, They know if they close their eyes long enough, that they'll dream of you, still standing, still smiling, still alone, and somehow, still winning. And the irony, oh, the sweet, twisted irony, is that the very ones who said you'd never make it now measure their own worth against your shadow. They can't help it. You haunt them. You live rent-free in the cracks of their consciousness, whispering through every failure they tried to bury under filters and fake confidence. They light candles to distractions, scroll through illusions, drown themselves in noise. But the silence you left behind, it follows them, it's alive. Because silence, when earned through suffering, doesn't die. It echoes. You're the ghost of their guilt and the proof of their mediocrity. You're the reminder that discipline doesn't need witnesses, that progress doesn't require permission. You're not loud, you're magnetic. You didn't chase attention. You made attention trip over itself trying to understand you. That's the part they'll never recover from. You made them irrelevant without even mentioning them. You moved through the noise like a scalpel, cold, surgical, precise. You didn't post every move. You executed in the dark. You didn't beg for support. You became your own infrastructure. You learned to sharpen your tongue, harden your eyes, and polish your pain until it gleamed like armor. You realized somewhere along the line that nobody was coming to save you. And instead of crying about it, you became the thing that rescues itself. And now, they're praying for your downfall in group chats they'd never admit exist. They analyze your silence like it's a code. They try to replicate your formula. But what they don't understand is that you can't copy frequency. You can steal words, style, strategy, but you can't replicate the soul print of someone who earned every molecule of their power. You can't fake what's forged. They want to know your secret. Here's the secret. You didn't do it for them. You did it because there was a voice in you that said, enough. Enough begging for crumbs. Enough shrinking to fit the room. Enough apologizing for the fact that your silence shakes the ground. You did it solo. Not out of choice, but out of necessity. Because when everyone left, you discovered the one truth that separates gods from ghosts. You never needed an audience to become infinite. You took the darkness and married it to your will. You took the loneliness and turned it into strategy. You took betrayal and made it curriculum. You turned every night of doubt into a blueprint for dominance. While they prayed for shortcuts, you suffered deliberately. And that suffering carved your name into something cosmic. They called you stubborn. They called you crazy. They said, you can't do it alone. And now they can't even sleep in a room where your name is spoken, because it's not just a name anymore. It's a diagnosis. It's the symptom of what happens when belief evolves into proof. You didn't play their game, and you didn't ask to join. You rewrote the rules with your blood, and every time they tried to mock you, you learned. Every insult became intel. Every betrayal became blueprint. Every humiliation became a training montage only you could see. And while they were busy gossiping, you were engineering silence into empire. You're not just self-made, you're self-forged. There's a difference. Self-made sounds cute on a shirt. But self-forged? That means fire. That means isolation. That means choosing pain before pleasure until pain itself becomes pleasure. You don't fear suffering anymore. You schedule it. You digest pain for breakfast because you know it's the only meal that still builds muscle. And they'll never understand that because they've never gone hungry enough to taste the truth. You did. You starved for purpose. You went days without dopamine. You disappeared not because you failed, but because you were reconstructing your DNA. You stopped trying to be liked and became something far more dangerous, respected. You stopped trying to be relatable and became something far more haunting, inevitable. That's why they can't look you in the eye, because deep down, they know. They had the same chances. They had the same 24 hours, the same air, the same fear. The only difference, when life hit you in the face, you didn't call for help. You smiled, you spat blood, fixed your posture, and said, "Round 2. And the universe took notice. It whispered to your enemies, "You're in trouble." Because the one who walks alone doesn't walk by choice. They walk with momentum, and momentum, once it becomes conscious, becomes unholy. You don't even talk the same anymore. Your voice carries voltage. People don't hear you, they feel you. Every sentence sounds like a prophecy. Every breath carries a warning. You don't argue, you don't explain, you simply exist, and the room corrects itself around you. You're not cold, you're calibrated. You're not emotionless, you're emotionally engineered. You're not heartless, you just stopped renting your empathy to parasites. That's why they panic, because they realize too late that your independence isn't rebellion, it's sovereignty. They've never seen someone function this clean without fuel from others. They don't understand that your solitude isn't punishment. It's proof that you survived initiation. You've become what every manipulator fears, the one who no longer needs anyone to be dangerous. You're no longer reactive, you're radioactive. You walk through chaos untouched because chaos remembers your scent. You don't avoid pain, you collect it, study it, refine it, and turn it into strategy. And that's what kills them. You didn't rage, you didn't beg, you didn't throw a tantrum online, you just vanished. And when you reappeared, you weren't human anymore. You were myth. Now every time your name crosses their mind, it hijacks their nervous system. They see your face in reflections, in timelines, in their own insecurities. They tell themselves they don't care, but they can't stop watching, because deep down, they know. You didn't rise by accident. You rose by execution, alone, no cosign, no knees bent, no fake alliances, just one mind, one mission, one war fought in the dark. And you won, quietly, efficiently, brutally. You didn't break their system, you outlived it. You didn't ask to be remembered, you became unforgettable by default. And now they stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m., hearts pounding, thoughts spiraling, pretending they're not thinking about you. But their silence betrays them, because you are the reminder that one individual, armed with clarity and contempt, can collapse empires without raising a voice. You are the consequence of every hand that didn't help. You are the living result of what happens when rejection meets rage and turns into religion. You didn't just do it alone. You proved that alone is enough. And now, every night, the same question burns through their brains like a curse. How the hell did they do it? Without us. That's why they can't sleep, because they finally realized you never needed them. And that truth? It's terminal. They'll lie about it, of course, pretend they're not watching, pretend they're not calculating your hours, your pace, your pulse. But you can feel it, how the air itself tightens when your name comes up. Because deep down, they know something went wrong in the equation. You weren't supposed to win like this. You weren't supposed to build something from ashes without a single hand extended. You see, this world worships dependency. It crowns the loud. It applauds the connections, the collabs, the polished cosigns that make mediocrity look legitimate. But you You bypassed all of that. You refused to kneel. You refused to audition. You chose the long way, the lonely way, the only path that turns mortals into legends. You didn't beg for the door to open. You became the keyhole itself. And when you unlocked yourself, reality blinked. They don't hate you because you succeeded. They hate you because you made it look inevitable. You didn't scream about it, didn't post every move. You simply appeared, different, sharper, untouchable. And in that silence, you dismantled their co-motherfucker-ort. You turned every excuse they've ever used into a mirror. Because the truth is, they had the same storms. They just never learned how to dance in lightning. They'll tell stories to make themselves sleep. You just got lucky. They had help. They must have sold something to someone. But luck doesn't stay this consistent. Help doesn't replicate this kind of dominance. You can't fake focus like yours. You can't imitate obsession. You can't reverse engineer destiny. You did it solo. That's what kills them. No mentor, no ladder, no applause. Just madness and repetition, hammering reality until it bent. And when you finally stood tall, you didn't look like a winner. You looked like a warning. Because your existence says, if I can do it alone, then what's your excuse? That's why they can't sleep. You turned their co-motherfucker-ort into accusation. You made their mediocrity feel loud. You remember those nights, don't you? The ones that didn't end. The ones where silence was heavier than bullets. Where you stared at the ceiling wondering if any of it meant anything. Where the idea of quitting wasn't dramatic. It was practical. But you didn't quit. You sharpened. You learned to stop begging the world to see you and made the world feel you instead. You learned that isolation doesn't mean absence. It means incubation. You learned that solitude isn't weakness. It's weaponization. Every time you got ignored, you documented the coordinates of your next attack. Every betrayal became blueprint. Every humiliation turned into footage for your highlight reel. And the day you finally stepped back into the light, the universe exhaled because it knew you'd completed the metamorphosis. That's the duality of it, isn't it? They see the calm. They don't see the chaos that raised it. They see the confidence. They don't see the collapse that carved it. You are both peace and punishment. A halo wrapped around a razor blade. An angel who learned that mercy is a form of weakness in a dishonest world. You didn't just evolve, you ascended. You stopped asking, why me? And started asking, why not me? You stopped needing closure. You started needing momentum. And momentum, once it tastes blood, doesn't stop. Now look at you, moving like time itself can't catch you. Speaking like every word is a weapon with a silencer attached. You don't flex, you vibrate. You don't chase validation. You alter atmosphere. You are the calm before the system crash. The smile before the stock drops. The proof that energy can't be destroyed. It can only be rebranded as you. You became your own empire. You made solitude into a boardroom. You signed contracts with pain and turned profit from pressure. You didn't pray for freedom. You built it brick by brick, while everyone else was still asking for permission to breathe. And now, when they try to study you, they get lost. Because your formula isn't in books, it's in scars. They can copy your moves, but not your metabolism for suffering. You digest pain like oxygen. You turn heartbreak into propulsion. You turn every no into fuel cells. They can't compete with that. They can't replicate you, because what they don't understand is that while they were building resumes, you were building reputation. While they were chasing relevance, you were cultivating resonance. While they were curating, you were creating. And the world doesn't remember who fit in. It remembers who didn't need to. So let them lose sleep. Let them scroll. Let them panic every time your name trends. Let them whisper your name like superstition. Because deep down, they know. If you did all this alone, what happens when you decide you're just getting started? You didn't just do it solo. You did it without folding. You did it without compromise. You did it without kneeling to their counterfeit gods. And that kind of integrity, it's radioactive. It lingers in their thoughts. It poisons their illusions. It burns through their facades. Because you are not the success story they wanted. You're the accident they can't explain. You're what happens when failure backfires. You're the glitch that refused to be deleted. You're the living proof that darkness doesn't always swallow people. Sometimes it graduates them, and the world will keep spinning, pretending not to notice. But every night, when the lights go out and the pretense fades, they'll remember the sound of your silence, the kind that doesn't need to shout, the kind that hums through walls, the kind that says, "I warned you." And while they twist in their sheets, haunted by the version of you they could have never imagined, you'll be somewhere quiet, smiling, building the next empire in the dark, because legends don't rest, they recharge alone.